Welcome back to the channel, where we explore the latest developments and the hidden stories surrounding Catherine, Princess of Wales, and the royal family. Today, we have some breaking news. Prince Harry finds himself in a no-win situation as a judge makes a bombshell decision and his lawyers walk away. This war, Harry's struggle, not on a distant battlefield but in the cold wood-lined halls of London's High Court, has reached a critical juncture. The crusade he embarked upon to exonerate himself against the British media now seems poised to engulf him. The judges have issued stern warnings about his legal conduct, while some of his own lawyers are being accused of professional misconduct. How did this righteous struggle for justice, sparked by a major triumph, come to resemble a high-risk gamble that could ruin his finances, his reputation, and the peaceful life he claims to be seeking? This is more than a story about lawsuits and settlements. At its core is the tale of a man who seeks to dismantle an empire of ink and power with the only weapons he has left: memories, money, and an unrelenting grudge from the past. It is a struggle that has compelled the British establishment to confront itself in the distorted reflection of tabloid culture, while also propelling a principled prince to the very end of his strength. What began as a genuine search for the truth has escalated into a multi-pronged battle. The ultimate and conclusive battle is now underway, and the aftermath is likely to be felt for generations to come in both the royal family and the media. A payoff fit for a king and a glimmer of satisfaction. To understand the full extent of Prince Harry's current situation, it is necessary to go back to the point of his most exhilarating victory. In December 2023, Justice Fancourt of the High Court ruled that the Duke of Sussex was entitled to £140,600 in damages from Mirror Group newspapers, MGN. But it was not so much the money that was important, as the official recognition he had been seeking for so long, recognition in the form of a formal official acknowledgement. For so many years, Harry had been the lone voice crying out that his life had been under constant surveillance by the media, using illegal tactics, whereas other members of the royal family had similar disputes settled quietly behind the scenes. Harry refused to take the route of hush money. The royal family has always functioned on the motto of never complain, never explain. Harry, however, chose the opposite course, demanding explanations in broad daylight, a shocking display of defiance against the institution. His decision to take the witness stand in June 2023 was a historic moment. This was only the second time in history that a senior member of the royal family had put himself up for the scrutiny of open cross-examination. The first time being in 1891, when the future King Edward VII gave evidence in a baccarat slander trial. Harry was the first in over a century to do so again. His voice rang out in an almost empty courtroom as he spoke of a life lived in constant suspicion. The world watched as the king's son took 3 days of hard testimony in the witness box. He spoke of the terrible psychological cost of having his most intimate conversations and deepest fears splashed across the front pages of newspapers. He spoke of relationships that had fallen apart under the weight of paranoia, of friendships that had been poisoned by fear, and of the scars left by these. This was more than giving evidence. It was a confession from a wounded soul. What Harry needed was loud and clear confirmation, and this came in the form of Justice Fancourt's judgment. The court found that phone hacking at MGN was widespread and routine, ruling that 15 out of 33 articles submitted by Harry were obtained through illegal information gathering. This was a devastating blow to the long-held assertion of the tabloid press that such activities were merely the actions of rogue journalists and not representative of a systemic problem. The financial settlement came in February 2024, when MGN agreed to pay substantial additional damages and cover most of Harry's legal costs, taking his total compensation package over £400,000. As part of the deal, MGN issued a public apology, admitting to unlawful information gathering and expressing formal regret, marking the financial peak of what had been an emotionally charged victory for Harry. In Harry's mind, this victory was more important than a trophy or a headline. It was like rocket fuel, proof in his mind that the press was rotten to its core and that the system could be bent, or even snapped, when you pressed hard enough with enough grit. Riding the high of victory, His approach to law changed from precision strikes to something much bigger, almost a sweep, a carpet-bombing mentality. If he could take down the Mirror, why not the Mail, the Sunday? Even the government itself. The MGN victory was more than a victory in court. It was a rewiring of his world and a blueprint for every battle that would come after. He had tasted blood, and perhaps predictably began to think he was invincible. What he didn't realize was that a long, hard war is a resource drain, even for a prince. The institutions he sought to take down had a certain hardwired resilience, an unyielding state apparatus that couldn't be blitzed into submission. This misread would soon become apparent. At the same time, a much more personal war was being waged alongside the legal battles. This secondary conflict would prove to be a source of crushing defeats and would show Harry the true extent of his power. His attempt to secure state-funded police protection when he traveled back to the UK was more than a matter of practicality. It was an existence-level struggle for status, security, and his place in the land he had left behind. This question had been simmering since 2020, when Harry and Meghan announced they would step back from their duties as members of the royal family. In response, RAVIC, the Executive Committee for the Protection of Royalty and Public Figures, a mysterious but powerful force within the Home Office, decided that Harry would no longer automatically qualify for the highest level of police protection. Instead, his protection would be assessed on a customized case-by-case basis. To the Duke of Sussex, the decision was an act of betrayal. "The threat is not from what I do, but from who I am," he said. "It is not from whether I carry out royal duties day to day. It is from the fact that I am the son of a king and the brother of a future king. These are not things that can be taken away." He also cited the threats against his family and the chilling experience in September 2024, when a stalker allegedly came close to him during a visit to Britain. Harry did not think the RAVIC decision was a sensible administrative adjustment. "It is a punishment, a severing of a sacred protection," he said. And in September 2021, he did what had become his habit. He took his case to court. His lawyers filed for a judicial review, claiming the decision was irrational, procedurally unfair, and discriminatory. The government's reaction was clinical and calculated. As Harry was no longer a working royal and did not represent the monarch in any official capacity, the government claimed it could adjust security protocols to reflect this new reality. The risk analysis conducted by RAVIC, they claimed, was valid, and they criticized Harry's lawyers for adopting such an aggressive stance. At the heart of the conflict was a profound difference. Harry believed security was a birthright that came with his royal lineage, while the government considered it a resource to be allocated based on one's role in the monarchy. In February 2024, the High Court handed down its decision. RAVIC's methods were neither illegal nor irrational. The decision was decisive, and retired Judge Sir Peter Lane ruled firmly in favor of the government. For Harry, the decision was a crushing validation of his diminished status. Harry refused to back down, however, and he appealed the decision. The April 2025 appeal hearing was tense and electric. Harry himself appeared in court, spending 2 days listening as his lawyers argued that the decision-making process was fundamentally flawed. Government attorneys argued that the state had the right to allocate and protect its limited resources. In May 2025, the Court of Appeal issued its ruling. It was unanimous. The appeal was rejected. All 3 judges agreed that there were no grounds for overturning the original ruling. With this ruling, the final curtain came crashing down. Suddenly and conclusively, Harry's reaction to this final blow shook a shockwave through the top echelons of British society. Talking to the BBC from his California home, he spoke with a passion that tore through any notion of royal decorum. The language he used was so inflammatory, so outrageous, and so unbecoming that legal brains were left aghast. He labeled the decision a good old-fashioned establishment stitch-up, which was as good as accusing the British judiciary of being dishonest and biased. In this instance, a senior member of the royal family seemed to suggest that the courts had ruled against him not on the law, but as part of a wider conspiracy to protect the establishment. Legal brains were left visibly stunned, a senior legal academic warned that suggesting the courts were a stitch up undermined the very foundations of the rule of law, as if the independent judiciary in Britain was a political puppet. This was more than a prince having a tantrum because he lost a case. It was a dangerous, destructive, and utterly irresponsible attack on one of the pillars of British democracy. The outburst came at a steep cost. It alienated many who had previously sympathized with his security concerns, repositioning him not as a victim of inflexible bureaucracy, but as a man who refused to accept a legal verdict that did not go his way. The security struggle proved costly to him, not only in terms of police protection, but also in terms of his public image and reputation within the institution. Revenge, it seemed, had a price that was simply too high to pay, although it made for great headlines. As the year 2025 dawned, a more subtle but potentially damaging front opened in Harry's struggle: the financial weight of his legal fight. Judges charged with protecting the court's purse strings grew increasingly frustrated as costs spiraled and headlines followed the lawsuits almost as closely as the allegations themselves. The breaking point came during a cost management hearing in Harry's current lawsuit against Associated Newspapers Limited, the publisher of the Daily Mail. He was one of 7 other high-profile claimants, including Sir Elton John and Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who were suing ANL for unlawful information gathering. Both sides put forward staggering estimates of what it would cost to take the case to trial. The lawyers representing the claimants were talking big numbers, around £18 million to £19 million in fees, with AL echoing similar projections. Together, the two sides were poised to blow through nearly £40 million, simply to argue claims that Justice Nicklin had so bluntly characterized as actually very basic. This stung like a bolt of judicial lightning. This was no giant, billions, at-stake corporate fight. It was a privacy dispute, whose legal bills had swelled to absurdly high levels in comparison to the underlying claims. The court's message was clear. In a stern warning, Justice Nicklin and Senior Master Cook reduced the budgets accordingly. The claimants were capped at £4.84 million and AL at £4.445 million. In other words, the court indicated that both sides had planned to spend 4 to 5 times what was actually warranted, and that sort of extravagance would not be countenanced. For Harry, the implications were dire. Even his share of the reduced £5 million plus budget would likely cost him hundreds of thousands. Assuming victory, losing, however, might well leave him on the hook for millions more. And to make matters worse, the costs hearing had revealed some very questionable tactics. Court documents indicated that the claimant's side was paying witnesses for their testimony. While not strictly illegal, this practice raised very serious questions about motivations and the reliability of testimony. The court responded with a second ruling. Justice Fancourt demanded that Harry's lawyers reveal all documents connected with these payments, ruling that any kind of inducements or financial rewards must be completely turned over. This ruling handed Ail's lawyers a powerful weapon and further squeezed Harry's fragile legal defense. At a preliminary hearing in January 2026, surprisingly, damning charges emerged against individuals on Harry's legal team, charges of deceit and unprofessional conduct in witness solicitation. David Sherborne, Harry's lead counsel, strongly pushed back against these claims, calling them a desperate attempt to deceive the court. However, the harm was done. The honor of Harry's own legal team was now in question. Weeks passed, and the focus changed. The focus shifted from the alleged wrongdoing of the tabloids to the behavior of those bringing the cases. In the background, the pressure continued to build as costs escalated and the legal fight intensified. Meghan Markle, as per Volt Arius reports, was becoming increasingly agitated about the emotional and financial toll. Insiders close to the Sussexes told the media that she wanted Harry to be able to live free from endless conflict. A life not defined by lawsuits, but for Harry, freedom meant winning everything. It wasn't just about the cost anymore, it was about principle. A classic devil's bargain was being struck. Then came a shocking twist. Murdoch's surrender and Harry's surrender. Just as the world was preparing for a massive, multi-pronged legal fight, Prince Harry pulled off a stunning about-face. In January 2025, just days before a high-stakes trial was set to begin, he settled with News Group newspapers, NGN, the Rupert Murdoch, owned publisher of The Sunday, and the defunct News of the World. This was the case many thought would be the linchpin of Harry's crusade. Ahead, on Fight with the biggest player in tabloid journalism, News of the World had been at the heart of the original phone hacking scandal that shook Britain in 2011, leading to public inquiries, criminal charges, and the paper's eventual closure. Harry's lawsuit against NGN was broad, covering 1996 to 2011, his entire childhood and young adulthood, and alleging widespread illegal activity. The 8-week trial was set to be explosive, a forensic analysis of the darkest corners of the media empire controlled by Murdoch. There was every chance of revelations going all the way to the top of the organization, perhaps even to Murdoch himself. Senior executives and former journalists were scheduled to be cross-examined. It was set to dwarf the MGN case in terms of scope and significance. And then, suddenly, it was all over. A joint statement brought the whole thing to a close. The settlement was hailed as a PR and financial coup. While the terms of the agreement were not disclosed, several sources estimated that the total cost, damages, and legal bills included was well over £10 million. More importantly, a public apology was issued by NGN that went far beyond the usual bland statement. The company admitted an illegal act against Harry, acknowledged the violation of his late mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, and issued a full and unequivocal apology. It was a monumental victory by any standard. Harry won a hefty settlement and forced the notoriously litigious Murdoch media empire to issue a full and unequivocal apology. But the response was not universally positive. Supporters and detractors alike were left stunned, and some even allowed themselves to feel the sting of disappointment. By settling, Harry ceded his best possible leverage, the trial itself. 8 weeks of non-stop headlines, the sight of Murdoch's heavy hitters on the stand, and the inner workings of NGN exposed to the world, all of it was simply erased. In place of 2 months of non-stop headlines that would have kept the pressure on the tabloid empire, there was only one round of headlines celebrating the settlement before the news cycle moved on to something else. Critics were quick to declare that he'd been bought off, that NGN had put a price on silence and paid it. His supporters were quick to point out that he'd gotten exactly what he'd set out to do: accountability, an apology, and compensation, all without having to suffer the emotional trauma of another full-scale trial. And to be fair, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. By early 2025, fighting on multiple fronts was becoming simply unsustainable. The toll of the MGN testimony, the crushing blow of the security case setback, and the financial strain of the ANL fight were all taking a very real, very visible toll. In that sense, the NGN settlement may have represented less a lapse of principle than a recognition of reality. After all, not even a prince can fight everyone everywhere. All at once, that moment proved telling. Only 2 days after the news of the NGN settlement broke, the judge's decision that cut into his legal budget in the ANL case came to light. Taken together, the two developments painted a telling portrait: a crusader beginning to factor the cost, a commander realizing that even in a righteous war there comes a time to think about a strategic retreat, perhaps only to prevent a complete collapse. The final front, one last stand in court with the NGN empire effectively neutered, and the government battle already lost. Harry's massive legal crusade has been reduced to one crucial front: the lawsuit against Associated Newspapers Limited. This is the battle he has decided to take to its ultimate conclusion. The clash began on the 14th of January 2026, within the walls of London's High Court. By the 22nd of January, Harry was back in the witness box, ready to enter the fray of cross-examination once again. His regular appearances at the preliminary hearings are not coincidental. Rather, they represent a statement of intent regarding how committed he is to this process. His written testimony stretches across dozens of pages and represents a dark history of childhood and young adulthood lived under siege. He describes how the Mail's coverage left him paranoid, how the intrusion led to a lifetime of mistrust, destroyed relationships, and resulted in psychological trauma. Harry and 6 other claimants believe that ANL engaged in a systematic and prolonged process of illegal information gathering over the past 20 years. The claims include the use of private investigators, installing listening devices, the illegal procurement of private information, and intercepting communications. It is a broad range of allegations. ANL has fought back hard, denying all allegations and labeling them absurd and an insult to proper journalism. Their defense is complex and multi-layered. They flat out deny any criminal activity. Harry's allegations are overstated, bordering on delusional. To blame the press for his own poor life choices. Many allegations are simply too old to be considered actionable under the law. And, most forcefully, they attack Harry's witnesses and lawyers over payment disputes, which they have turned into their most potent weapon. This is the final showdown in a 9-week trial, far from the kind of climactic moment where a quick settlement might be reached, as in the NGN trial. This is a battle to the very end, a statement of Harry's continued desire for one final, definitive public condemnation of a big tabloid publisher. As counsel for AL, Anthony White KC began his cross-examination. The hard truth of life in court came roaring back with a vengeance. To question every memory, every assertion, every inconsistency. Harry has been here before, but never with so much at stake. Justice Nicklin, already evidencing a certain impatience with both sides, now finds himself burdened with the duty of steering a case that stretches back decades to a definitive, worldwide conclusion, all while wading through the toxic mire of misconduct allegations that clouds the legal teams. For Harry, this case is no longer simply about the money and the apologies. It's now about what kind of person he is going to be when he walks away from his life as a royal. A victory will cement his place as a radical reformer who challenged and dismantled a media behemoth, but defeat might see him as a dogged litigant blowing through millions of dollars on a personal crusade, and possibly owing a large sum to ANL for their legal costs. He's put it all on the line, all the chips stacked in the middle of the table. It's all or nothing, and now the world gets to see what happens next. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.